Hey everybody, I'm SARA WISEMAN. Our topic today is how do we open? How do we open? And here's the teaching part. Just as with the learning of anything, you must have patience because understanding does not happen at once. You learn over time. Your understanding increases. With study, you begin to understand. With practice, you become adept. So it is with spiritual intuition. Sometimes there are great jolting openings all at once, which are really only moments in which you see your true essence for the first time. Other times the openings are gradual. Everything brings understanding. It's interesting, we kind of think, we know that we have grown from babies. We were born as infants, we became babies, then we were toddlers. Here we are now at whatever age we're at. And we know, our bodies grew, our experiences grew, our understanding grew, all of that happened. We continued to change and grow. And yet sometimes we have this idea about our spirituality or our soul growth that boom, I'm going to get it, and then that's it. There's no more growth after that. I've achieved the pinnacle. Yeah, okay, no, it's not the I can't even think of any person out there right now, including myself, who's like, yep, I've got it, there's no more growth for me. So kind of take it with a sense of humor and some humility that there's more to be learned, no matter how good you are with your practices and so forth. This idea that understanding happens over time. When you first learned how to tie your shoes, you probably struggled to learn it, and it took you some times, and maybe you did the bunny ears at first, and then you learned the loop method, and then as you became better at it, you could do it really quickly. And then as you became older and maybe even you became a parent, maybe you found, or you were taking care of others, you found yourself quickly able to tie other people's shoes. And then maybe as technology progressed, and maybe suddenly you weren't even tying shoes anymore. Maybe you were using Velcro or those little sort of mountaineer webbings or a slip-on or something. So all of this is about your relationship to shoe tying and how things grew and changed over time. You could still go back and do that original method if needed, but you may be using something different. Maybe using something faster. And this idea of learning over time is important because sometimes we get kind of frustrated on the spiritual path, especially if maybe when we learn to work with the guides and angels at first, using some different meditations where we go up, we had profound experiences and it worked really well. And then, it's years later and you're like, well, I do that, but it's not working the same, or I'm not getting the same level of experience when I do those practices. And here's where I would suggest that instead of berating yourself or thinking that there's something wrong, there's either two things going on. One is you aren't really doing your practices, you've stopped connecting, and nothing's happening because you're not showing up to the practice. This happens a lot. It can be very intense to be in connection with your guides and angels all the time. It can be very intense to hear their advice, especially if it's not what you want to hear. And it can be very intense to follow their guidance, especially if that's not what you want to hear. No, you're not required to. It's just, I find if I follow what my personality wants, that's, for me, that's not going to work the best for me. That's what I've figured out over the years. The personality is not that great of a decision maker. For me, the highest potentiality always comes when I like, okay, guides, what is it? And I continue to have that back and forth. And the personality also usually argues over what the guides provide me with, like, no thank you, I don't want to do that. So that's been that's been a challenge. But once I finally was like, okay, letting the ego rest, letting the ego have not being in charge as its position has been incredibly useful. And as I've allowed myself to follow what the guides have said, I really always see like it's so much better than what I could have figured out for myself. So of course you can do whatever you want. This is your, we talk about the free will, or the soul's ability to make every decision. But also, if you have these incredible, wise mentor helpers, when you listen to them, you have this whole guidance team of beings who are lots smarter than humans. And why wouldn't you sort of take some of that in this higher level thinking or this higher level understanding? Why wouldn't you work with that if that were available to you? Even if it's not really what you had in mind for your life, you were thinking of something different. So there's the first part of, you may not be receiving because you're not doing the practice. You may not be doing the practice because you get tired of having to put the ego in second position. And sometimes then there's the third option, which is you're doing the practices, you're following along, and then you notice you don't need to do the steps as formally all the time because you're mostly in that situation. You're mostly in that awareness where you're paying attention. Well, let's see, you're having connection, you're paying attention, you're noticing everything all at once, you're taking everything in as symbolic or metaphoric, or having, you understand there's no random, there's no coincidence. You understand that this intelligence of the universe, this collective intelligence or collective soul, is actually real, and you're part of it. And so you begin to sort of flow without having to pay attention quite as much. You're quickly tying that shoelace because you've tied it a million times, and you know how to do that. So the three things that most likely is, you're not doing the practice. You're doing the practice, but you are resisting it and fighting it and not doing what you receive, for all the many reasons that can happen. And 3 is like, you're so deep in the practice, it's become second nature. And so if you haven't had any jolting openings for a while, and if you're feeling in a stuck mode, I would look at those 3 ideas and look at where you are on the stage of opening. Kind of look at like, when did I do a last formal practice? When have I just received so much guidance and basically just disregarded it or said no way? Or how am I just really so into that space of following along in flow that I'm becoming more and more adept. Becoming more and more adept, and as I continue on that path, it's really interesting process. At the beginning, I would say it's quite rocky. If you persevere, you'll just be taken to places that you couldn't have imagined, all positive. It's a very interesting way to use oneness as your guiding passage in this lifetime. Thank you for listening.